Right. So, good afternoon, Axiom Flux, and we have today with us Mark Stevens from the No State Project, and Dave Witcher from wherever he is, somewhere out there. Good afternoon, lads.
Afternoon.
Afternoon.
Jolly good. Well then, Mark, perhaps we get straight into it, if that's all right. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself and your No State project, when you started it and why you thought about doing it, and basically an introduction about what it all means and perhaps where it's all going.
I'm glad for the opportunity to speak with you guys. Yeah, the No State Project is a radio show I do. It's really just an extension of what I do during the week, from what I started back in 1997, helping people to resolve conflicts and attacks by those men and women called government. And it's pretty simple. You know, I learned early on that if I took affirmative positions, especially if I made legal claims, whether I was right or wrong was completely irrelevant, because in the eyes of those co-government, if you any disagreement with them is automatically deemed not just wrong, but frivolous. And I started learning to take I learned from those mistakes and stop making affirmative statements other than statements such as the prosecution or the cop has no evidence, which kept the burden of proof still on them. So looking at things from a logical standpoint and reason that the burden of proof is always on the proponent of the argument, which even holds in court. The burden of proof is always on the prosecution. And just asking questions, getting them to verify the garbage that they're spewing, turned to be a lot more effective at being able to resolve these conflicts and save some people not only a lot of stress and trauma, but money in the process. And so, in the nutshell, it's taking an anarchist view and applying the Socratic method to this garbage and showing that there are no states, there are no citizens. It's all demonstrably false. It's nothing but public relations, which is why I have on the back of the first book, Adventures in Legal Land, is it possible that what you think is real is just a PR scheme, and that's all it is. And so, to be short, we're using the Socratic method to destroy the prosecution's arguments without taking a burden of proof upon ourselves.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good. I've been following you very closely, Mark, for the last few years, and have to tip me hat to you, my friend. Awesome.
Well, I appreciate that.
I mean, for me, I like to sort of boil things down very nuts and bolts. I'm aware that the legal system is a Ponzi scheme set up by a group of people to benefit from legal jargon. It's like going back to serfdom for me in England, after sort of studying a bit of history and having an understanding of what our England was and where we've come from. And like you say, when we question the legal system, we're shot down in flames like a B-52 bomber, which is very sad, because for me, the people that are running the mills and supposedly adjudicating law in this country, I think, personally, have a moral responsibility to administer justice properly. But we know we're just seen now as cash cows. It's like we've got £20 notes hanging off of us from all over the place. It's sad, mate. We are in a very, very sad state of affairs in this country, I have to say.
Well, it's using language like that, realizing that there is no actual country. Yeah, the entire system is based off of fraud and violence. Government doesn't exist. There's just men and women forcing us to pay them. And you can't expect anything else. Why aren't they interested in justice? Why are they stalling? Why are they not doing this? Why are they doing that? Well, it's because they're just men and women forcing us to pay them. We can't expect that people who force you to pay them are going to be interested in justice. They're not. And there's no arguing with that. The only way somebody would argue against that is because they're ignoring the basic facts. And if anyone doesn't want to accept that there is no government, that they're just men and women forcing us to pay them, they're starting off on the wrong foot.
Sure enough.
There's no rational disagreement with that. They are just men and women forcing us to pay them. And if we don't start with those facts and acknowledge them and base our arguments and our position and our defense on that, then you don't stand a very good chance. You got to start off with what you can prove. You got to start off with what's real, and starting and giving them a free pass on that is not going to end well. It's like the law professor in Canada said to me a few weeks ago. He said, the courts and the government, they start with accepting the public relations or the claim is true and irrefutable. They start with that, and that's why you have so many problems. We should not be doing that.
Well, we're up against an army. The Law Society is just a private army. I've been to the Royal Courts of Justice many a times. I've followed Cole Lentz's trial to Queen's Bench and met Barley and all these fine gentlemen. Now, actually at the Royal Courts of Justice, it's courtroom number 37 that purports to be Queen's Bench. But when you speak to any of the ushers that come to the doors in courtroom 37, they have identification tags around their neck which says HMCTS, which is Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. So that's an administrative court process. So we are very, very in a sticky place in England. But like you say, ignorance is our Achilles heel, and it's our downfall. But when we start, like you have, been sort of writing books and teaching people all about the adventures in legal land, normal everyday people are coming into an understanding of different things, and they're challenging politely. For me to argue with anyone in the Law Society, I don't argue with no one. I make my points, but I think for arguing with the judges that we have in this country, I mean, let's face it, Mark. They've got the tasers, the guns, the cells. They're just sat there going, want to play with me? No problem. But I've got all the ace cards, and there's little old you little old lonesome, just stood there going, I could be in a lot of trouble here. So we're always in this fear-based situation, and that I don't think is tolerable, because these people are in a position of trust, and they're duty-bound and honour-bound to make sure they protect us in the person, but they're failing to do that. We can establish jurisdictional boundaries by what we say and how we act, and we can flip jurisdictions. Jurisdiction for me is a word a bit last year, really. I like to use the word dominion now, because we're all little energy cells, and once we know who we are and we can let them know that we're standing in our own kind of sovereignty, it puts us in a little bit of a different position. But they're still taking the mickey, Mark. They really are. I don't know what it's like in America where you are, but perhaps you can tell us a bit more of sort of what success you're having in America on some particular issues.
Well, it's tough wherever you are, because they're going, no matter what your physical location is, they're still men and women forcing you to pay them, and it's not about your consent. And that's why I've been able to have success not only in North America, including Canada, but we have had great success in Europe, as well as Australia and New Zealand. I mean, we had somebody who was on the show, and she also hosts a show called The Bunker Show every Wednesday there out of England. And not only did she get a traffic ticket thrown out, but she had £1,200 awarded against the prosecution for costs. So. Which was fantastic. It's great just to get it tossed out, but my gosh, to have costs awarded against the prosecution for £1,200, that's great. it's all the same thing now. They claim, regardless of your physical location and without any reference whatsoever to your political status, that if you're physically in England or physically in Canada, that their rules apply to you, and that gives them jurisdiction to do pretty much whatever the hell they want. It certainly gives them what they believe is, it gives them, in a practical sense, immunity to do whatever the hell they want. And so that's why we've been able to replicate what I've done here in Arizona 20 years ago and 10 years ago, and been able to have other people replicate it, whatever the physical location is. So whether it's whether the code violation is traffic, whether it's possession or taxes, it doesn't matter what the physical location is. I'm still waiting for the documentary proof and, of course, the translation for someone who in Germany who had gotten a very large tax issue thrown out, similar to what I did with the IRS last year, just by asking them for the proof that their arguments are based on. Now, obviously, what you guys are saying is a part of this. I mean, it's the violence. You know, we know that they've got guns. We know they got the tasers, and we know they got jails. But using the Socratic method has proven. And at markstevens.net, I have an awful lot of evidence to back this up, that most of these attacks that I help people with are resolved either by being completely thrown out or that they extend a deal that they can live with. And that's in spite of all the violence, because in spite of all the violence, they still seem to have a need to make it look fairly good to the masses, to the people who are watching it. And because of that, we're still able to, despite the violence inherent in the system, we're still able to get a large percentage of these things tossed out.
Sure enough, man. Mark, I think you've got a good understanding of the UCC codes. In particular, there's a UCC code, I think it's -1307, which reserves all of our rights, our common law rights, if you would like. Also, maybe, I'm not too sure whether you probably would know about the document which is called the International Civil and Political Rights 1966 and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Now, I spoke to the UN a few days ago, and I asked them straight out, do these covenants and these laws still stand today? And they said, absolutely. So they said, but the problem is enforcing it. So maybe you've dealt with the court system far more than I have. I don't attend these buildings because if you understand law, I'd rather play in the bigger courts. The administrative courts have no authority in England. But maybe you could shed some light on whether you think that where we get a violation between the human rights and our right to self-determination, and what happens when it comes up against this statutory code, and how to enforce these laws on these court systems.
Yeah, you cut out there.
Did you understand what I said about the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights? Mark?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. I've printed off a copy of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. I'm not sure are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, and I don't get into the UCC, and I don't use it, and I don't claim common law rights, and I don't use that. And it's interesting that you're raising that issue, because just the other day, for the first time ever, I had a supervisor with the Canadian Revenue Agency actually threaten me and accused me of violating some international treaty, which I thought was funny. And so I asked him, oh, you think this treaty applies to me? Do you have any actual proof that this treaty applies to me just because I'm physically in North America? And this was his answer. Whatever.
Bureaucracy, you've got to love it.
Yeah, so they're threats, and there's nothing behind them, and I see no value in using. Well, one, I wouldn't use the UCC because it's their rules, and
Sure.
common law stuff that's their rules too. Because remember, the everything, taxation is and slavery is okay under the common law. Maybe under the common law, slavery is not okay anymore, but taxation certainly is. So I'm not a fan of that. I look at Blackstone, I think, got it right when he said the three precepts of the law are these: to live honestly, injure no one, give every man his due. And I think that those three precepts sum up how we should live our lives anyway. And that's what I go back to. And I just don't rely on their rules, whether it's common law or the UCC or some United Nations charter. I don't get into that.
So basically, you're standing out there like a little bit of an island. Then you're saying, well, it's fine, you can say all that we like, but prove it applies to me.
Yeah, they're the ones that are making the argument. They're the ones who are making the claim that because I'm physically in the U.S., this treaty applies. So I just keep the burden where it belongs, and that's why you don't get evidence. You get juvenile statements like whatever. And I said, well, if you're on the witness stand there, Ron, do you really want to use whatever as an answer?
Yeah, that's very true.
So he just said, oh, well, no, no. The courts, I know the courts, they would never allow something like that. Oh, so now we have another great admission. It's a rigged system. You won't ever see cross-examination. Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't say. Yeah, you did. You did, because when you can make statements like that and attack someone that I'm working with, and you're asked for evidence and you say whatever, and then you tell me the courts will allow you to get away. Yeah, sounds rigged to me. And I just see everybody I see the importance of and the primacy of the individual as opposed to some mythological group.
Right.
I consider myself, by birth I'm Sicilian and Irish, but I don't feel any particular bond, or that there's a nation. Yeah. They're people, and that's why I say one of the most important things we can do when we're being attacked by them, or when we're looking at what people like Cameron are doing, is to realize there is no country, there is no state, there is no government. They're just people, and at best, it's a private company. And then when we look at them as just people and as a private company, and that they're trying to apply these rules to us, it makes a lot more sense. It's easier to formulate a defense.
So basically, swap the word law for contract and business, and you'll pretty much get maybe a bit of swing and a better angle on the situation.
I think, like what I mentioned earlier, is if you just use the word rule instead of law, it's not a contract in any sense because they're forcing you to pay them. And that's why I've asked bureaucrats and politicians, would you consider me a criminal? If I did things like you guys and I forced perfect strangers to give me money, would you consider me a criminal? And everybody knows the answer to that question. Of course I'm a criminal. But why aren't these people called Cameron or Julia Gillard or whoever, George Bush? Aren't they just men and women forcing us, perfect strangers to give them money? Why aren't they criminals? Well, because they are, and people give them there's a double standard logical fallacy that they use. Well, they're the government. No, they're just men and women. But they have the law. Prove that their rules that they call law, prove that they apply to anyone. I'll give you a year to give me. I'm the patient guy. Come back in 6 months, a year, however long you need. No one has ever been. I've confronted Scott Bales. He's the Arizona Supreme Court Chief Justice, a Harvard Law grad. He couldn't do better than the laws apply because we put other people in prison.
That's right. Yeah. The laws apply because the laws say so, basically.
You just basically use their circular logic. That's what they'll actually say that to you. The laws apply because they say so.
Yeah, no, to me that's not good enough. I'm not well. And do you know what? In England and probably in America, you'll be able to gauge your country or wherever you live better than me. But I know for sure that the people that live in this landmass called England in 2016 are very, very, very much waking up at this present moment in time. And we're seeing throughout markets, that the oil markets crash in, and whether that's engineered, they may be trying to be bringing in this cashless society. I'm not too sure, but when the normal men and women start having to struggle and they can't operate normally, and they start getting things in scarcity, they'll have no choice but to turn the X Factor off on the TV and start paying attention. Because I've always said, listen, just because you don't pay an interest into politics, it doesn't mean to say that politics won't take an interest in you. So.
Yeah, I have new people, contact me every day. Yeah. So the show is growing, and more people are standing up to them. I'd like to think that it'll happen in my lifetime. I'm still, I'm not, I'm in my 40s. I'd like to think in a couple decades that enough people would say, yeah, I've had enough. I've had enough. We're seeing through this. You don't need to kill people in order to provide services. You do not need to put people in prison to protect them. I mean, it does seem to be falling. Not as fast as I would like to see. I mean, considering that no one in the mainstream media will call out someone like Barack Obama crying about gun violence while he is hitting Yemen and Pakistan and who knows where with drone strikes, where he's killing dozens and dozens and dozens of innocent men, women, and children. He has killed hundreds of children, and he's up there. I can't even. It's just it's such rank hypocrisy, Dave. And to think that not one damn reporter will say, yeah, it's great that you're seem to be upset about children being killed here in North America, in Oregon, and in San Bernardino, but what about all those kids? How many nights have you stayed awake crying because of all the kids you have killed in Yemen and Pakistan? How is it possible, Dave, that not one damn reporter can say that?
Because they're on the payroll, and they got pensions, and they got families. Everyone, Mark, I would say the majority of the population are sucked into the system, whether they're in the police force, whether they're a reporter, whatever walk of life they're in. They're all out trying to turn a coin. This fictitious money system that the IMF put into place after the Deep Depression, for me, is nothing better than a cartel, a mafioso system. I'm part Italian as well, so I understand the way the mafia operates. But they're all tied into the system. They're all waiting for that paycheck at the end of the month. Majority of people in this country now, if they don't get that paycheck at the end of the month, they can't pay for their mortgage, they can't pay for their food, they can't pay for their cars. So that's the reason why. We've just seen this week in Parliament, a lot of parliamentarians are absolutely pressing the issue onto David Cameron and saying, look, you're interceding in Yemen, and you are taking the sides, and you're killing people, you're training pilots, you're supplying them with munitions and stuff, and David Cameron he bats them off as if to say, your children go away. I feel that David Cameron's time will be up soon. I think that even if parliamentarians don't pull him out, I think the people of this country are sick to the back teeth with war, suffering. We can't even look after our own children that are homeless in this country. We've got paedophiles running through the establishment. That's verifiable. That's not me just talking like a nutcase. Throughout the pop industry also, Jimmy Savile, all these prolific paedophiles, but yet we've always got money to fight wars in countries that we've got no business even being in. We've done more damage to them parts of the world since we destabilised Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and all these others. And now I think Iran's probably on they'll probably take a cheap shot at Iran soon, because they just want to dominate the world for profit, greed, corporate growth. And I've said, England is a morally bankrupt country. It simply is. It's morally bankrupt, Mark.
Well, I would say that any society that accepts the double standard that is okay to lie, steal, kill, and cheat people just because you call yourself a government is morally bankrupt, and so it would hardly be fair to single out England, every society that tolerates this parasite. Uh, and I understand that people have families and whatnot, but there are things that we can do. I don't have a tradition. I don't have a job. I have to have things set up so I can provide services to people and be able to provide for my family. And there are ways, we all can move that way to set that up. But there's also other things we can do. At least if we're educating people, instead of taking this thing that it was proven in the Ash conformity test that we have, the tribe thinking or tribal thing, hive thinking, where, well, I know that there really is no such thing as a government, but my friends all think that there is, so I shouldn't say anything. It's like, I don't know what I could get more hate from, whether it's because I'm an anarchist or I'm a vegan, or I'm a vegan. It's just when you start talking about people, things that bring into light people's contradictions that in their heads, that they are maintaining these contradictions, you get this hate. But at least what we could do is educate people. That shouldn't, yes, it may cost you a few friends here and there, but my gosh, how can we sit still? You've got a system where people are murdered on videotape, and the guy who exposed it to the world is in prison. Two people, the machine gunners, are free. No one even knows their name.
That's right.
And yet Bradley Manning is rotting in a prison cell for probably the better part of his life. That is sick. That is sick. Whatever people want to say, that is sick. So you're right. But it's not just any society who tolerates this. Yeah, but you mentioned the X Factor and TV. That's the thing. If you really wanted a revolution, and I mean a bloodless one where people just say, we've had enough, we're not going to tolerate this parasite anymore, don't allow shut down sports, don't allow, just have that would actually wake people up. They couldn't drink beer and watch football.
Give them bread, wine, and keep them entertained.
Oh, you mentioned Jimmy Savile. That together with what happened with Marc Dutroux. How many times do you? And the same thing here with the Franklin cover-up. How many times do you have to see pedophile rings that go all the way to the top? Savile and Marc Dutroux are just two examples, but they're recent ones. Why are these always covered up? Why? Because the whole system is disgusting from beginning to end. There are no good cops. There are no good politicians. They are all criminals. And it's a sick thing. It's a really sick thing. You mentioned that, and it just set something off in my head.
Humanity is in a bit of a sick place at the moment, and what we hold dear to us, in truth, is not good. When we just turn a blind eye on everyone. I was speaking to Stav earlier about my interaction with the police when I got pulled over the other day, and they said, well, we're going to take your phone, we're going to seize it, we're going to take your motor and seize it. And I'm like, well, if you can do that, I don't own it, which for me is a bit of an issue. It's like we're treated as children. We all know that we're wards of state, and I'm working on groups to bring that to an end. But when good men do nothing, bad things happen. But we're seeing throughout the world now that good men are not prepared to just turn a blind eye. Now, my interaction with the police was not very nice, but nonetheless, it happened. And when people shoot me down and say, well, you've got to have this, I say, well, that's fine. But then again, what about perhaps the 5 to 10 million people in this country that can't even afford to put a meal in their stomach? Because we've now in this country got 450 food banks that are not sponsored by the welfare state. then that tells me when a man or a woman can't afford to put food in their belly. Now, to have 450 food banks in the country is nothing to be proud of. It's the absolute contrary to be proud of. We should be sick to the stomach that we've got that amount of food banks. But there's probably got to be, I would say, 5 or 10 million people that are stuck in a poverty that they can't access the highways because they can't afford the tax, they can't afford the insurance, they can't afford all the other trappings that go with it. Does that mean then that us that can afford to do it can just turn a blind eye on them and say they're not worthy purely based upon the fact they're not financially sound? And I don't think that's fair. And we're all supposed to be living in a fair society, which I think is just wrong. Now, when we look at what the public services and the public sectors that we have in this country, we have the NHS, which I think is on its knees and going to be completely privatised soon, and that was the pride of England. It was the pride of Britain. But I don't see anyone from the NHS trying to kill me or kick my door in because I won't take one of their policies. I don't see anyone in the fire brigade, unless I ring them. They're not coming to my door and saying, you need to take our services. Same with dentists and everyone else that works in that public arena. But for me, when we've got a police force that, because we won't go with their status quo and we won't accept their terms and conditions of their business, all of a sudden we've got guys at our front doors with weapons of war, openly prepared to use them on the very thing that they swore to protect. That's basically the crunch of why I do what I do, because I'm not prepared to tolerate that, and I'm not prepared to subject future generations to that kind of mentality. And that's really all that's wrong in England, is the law society and the police force per se. Not everyone, because I can't tarnish everyone with the same brush. I know quite a few good coppers that I consider friends. How they act in their daily activity, I can't comment on because I've never witnessed it. But why are these people using arbitrary means to deprive us? And since 1990, and there's probably higher statistics in America, I know, because of all the guns, and I wish we had the right to defend ourselves. We do. But since 1990, there's been 1,443 people that have lost their lives whilst in custody, and not one officer has ever lost his liberty for his actions. That, mate, just look at the numbers. It speaks volumes. It's got to stop. That has got to stop.
Well, it's to be expected, though, because, like we said already, you've got a system that's based on pay me or I will hurt you. Pay me or go to prison. So we can't expect anything else. There's no reforming. The only reformation or reform that's needed is to change the manner in which the services are paid for. That's the beginning and end of the problem. That's why I've said there is no government. There's just men and women, forcing us to pay them. And if they stop forcing us, so that's why you get into those stupid things. But what about the roads? Like, you're more concerned about an economic issue that will take care of itself and has taken care of itself for several hundred years, if you pay attention, than the fact that you're filling prisons with innocent, peaceful people and then using the proceeds to bomb people, who are or who happen to live with us oil. The roads, there's historical and contemporary examples of roads being done privately, and the issue of the tragedy of the commons, or free rider, is really not an issue if you know anything about it. It comes down to, if people accept a double standard that is okay to lie, steal, kill, and cheat people for no other reason than you call yourself a government, they're going to get all the problems associated when you do accept that double standard. And that's why I also recommend, is when we are dealing with these attacks, that people go and ask these jurisdictional questions to city council people, where there's a public forum, because it trains you, it helps train you to be good at public speaking and going to court to address these attacks. and it lets other people too see. So when you're asking a council member, look, I understand you think that just because I'm physically in London that your rules apply to me. Do you have any actual proof that that's true? You and we know. I know I'm not. My audience is not the council member. It's not the politician. These people are too far gone. The money's just too much. It's just intoxicating to be able to kill and steal with immunity.
Yeah.
It's the victims. I've even had to tell them. They said, "You're not going to change my mind, Mark." I'm not trying. I'm trying to educate your victims so that your victims will stop complying with you. Because when your victims stop complying with you, all of a sudden you're not a ruler anymore. You're just some douchebag who can't convince people with reason and logic.
That's what we're trying to. That's my message to people. Is very peaceful. I try and believe that I come from quite a positive angle, and it is exactly to do what you just mentioned there, is to peacefully non-comply. Now, when I see on the telly people up in London protesting, or they're around parts of the country doing certain things with protests, first of all, they've got to pay to get there. Secondly, it's taking up their time and energy. I know that I have far more of an impact on the system by non-compliance, not paying the tax, not paying the council tax, not paying the income tax, and I'm sat here watching my telly, drinking my tea. I know that my actions and my moral compass is having far more of an effect on the system than anyone protesting. Now, the system is on such a knife edge that it has to create and generate this vast amounts of wealth on a daily basis just to, it's like a fire just consuming wood all the time. It just wants it, wants it, wants it. Now, when you get a certain group of people in a country, or whatever you want to call it, that switch their minds on and realise, actually, it's my input and my energy that's causing this problem. If you probably got 3 to 5% of the people of that geographical landmass say, actually, no more, it would bring the system to its knees, Mark. Knees. It'd be knocked down, bowled over like a ball down a bowling alley. Just knock the skittles down at the end. And that's what I think people need to understand and get into their brains.
It all, yeah, you're right. It all comes down to the number of people that are complying. So what's the old? I can't. Nobody rules when nobody obeys.
That's right.
And it's as long as a certain percentage of the people obey, then they can go. But once you get that magic number, whatever it happens to be, that not enough people are complying, then it grinds to a halt. They have to use more and more violence to get their compliance, and the more violence they use, the less they are compliant. The less consistent they are with their public relations, that they're just there to protect you. But yeah, the nonviolent non-cooperation is the biggest tool we have, and people will say, well, what can one guy do? I mean, you can't, whatever you're doing can't collapse this. That's probably true, most likely. Okay, but it's doing something, and there's value in living a more principled life. I don't have the biggest show in the world, but I've been able to influence people to not pay taxes, to not get licenses, to set their lives up in a way that they don't have business licenses and don't pay income taxes, and so there's something being done. That's why I like to quote, no one raindrop feels that they're responsible for the flood. I look at that, you and we are raindrops that are helping, and we're doing something. And I want to shake some people, say, don't you have any principles that are worth living? Any principles worth standing up for? My gosh, what are you 16 years old and you still haven't gotten matured at all? And that's why I think if someone who disagrees with me, I say, look, I live my life and I teach my kids this by some very simple principles. Do no harm. That is the key principle. Do no harm. Do you not agree with that? What are you, a maniac? And then the other one is, of course, do unto others, the golden rule. You treat others the way you want to be treated, and you're good. I just want to point out to people when they say, well, I agree with that too, do no harm. Okay, why don't you apply that principle to people called Cameron and George Bush? Apply the same principle that you live your life by and apply it to them. Yeah. And tell me what you think. Because if you applied that simple principle of do no harm to everybody and you don't accept that double standard, you're going to have a much clearer picture of what's wrong with this world or what's causing the majority of the problems. You talk about mass murder. Yeah, mass murder is a problem. Who's primarily responsible for that and has been historically? People who call themselves government and those who support them.
Yes, mate, that's all it is. I've done a small video yesterday. I went on to the official figures for England, and out of the 65 million people that live and breathe in this country, 26 million actually turn out and vote for whichever party that they wish to vote for. I've never voted in my life. I'm not interested in political agenda. But what fascinates me is that we're under this tyranny, but yet 2/3 of the country don't vote. That's an oxymoron. That's just crazy. These people should never be in the position that they're in when 2/3 of the people would rather sit at home and watch X Factor. Now, whether voting's a good thing or voting's a bad thing for me, my personal opinion is voting's never changed anything. You just get either a lesser evil or a greater evil for whoever's is in supposed power. Whenever you ring anyone up from a government institution, it's all about, well, you surrendered your sovereignty to become one of a group of people and have these certain. I went, oh, actually, no. If you've got anything that's got my signature on it, you might want to present that to me and that's why I like the covenants. The International Covenant for Civil and Political Right, because Article 1 says that every man, absolutely every man and woman, has to have the right. Now these ain't my rights. These are what they're confirming, which we have. Then I know my rights, but it says that we have to have the right to self-determination. We have to have the right of freedom of religion, freedom of economical, whichever we want to spend our money is fine. We can't be held in servitude. And slavery's been abolished. So that's why I like these covenants, because when you put them before them and say, well, these ain't my laws, I'm just standing over here as a man, but these are your laws, which you've signed up to and all been ratified with all the countries in the Western Hemisphere. This is United Nations law, international law, which should really trump the lot. So you take your bones out of that and you tell me, my self-determination tells me that if I just want to, like you say, live a life, do no harm, look at everyone as an equal, and I've absolutely got that right. I absolutely got that right, and they're never ever going to take it off of me. And like you said, we're small droplets from all around the world. You've got your stuff going on. There's people everywhere that are putting their head above the parapet and saying, oh, this isn't right. So the more people that do that, and the quicker that the message gets around. I've never spoke to you before today, but I've known about your stuff. I've seen your videos. I've watched what you're doing and what you're saying in America. It's all fantastic stuff. So, and bearing in mind that a lot of people now are switching off from the BBC. They're not watching the telly. They've all got tablets. They've all got iPhones. They're all watching on the tube train. They're watching YouTube videos and links. So I think within universal law, we're seeing that people are shifting in their patterns and seeking their media and their interests elsewhere, and that's got a roll-on effect, Mark. With me and you, we're just gatekeepers of a faith, of a certain set of principles of how men should behave in their lives. So if we can hold the fort and hold it well, and just put that dam up there and say, no more, the younger generations that are flying up behind us will just send a tsunami over the edge, and it'll all be done.
I appreciate that. I want to address when you started that statement and quote the great Lysander Spooner, whose we just had his birthday was a few days ago, so I have to talk about that, of course, and on my show. Maybe this will bring you a little more certainty to your decision about voting. A man is no less a slave because he is allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years. It's like voting for a new prison warden, and I get this even from anarchists, which was really surprising recently. I guess this Reddit is just a cesspool sometimes, and people think that because you get to vote, you're free, and I'm like, well, no. Even if you vote on the rule, the Constitution, the supreme rule, you're not voting for whether there's a government or not. You're not voting for that. That is what is important. And so he kept on getting really upset. Says, why do you keep going back to 1775? Like, because that's when it started. If I'm looking at the history of England, I want to know the history of the system, I'll go back to 1066. You go back to the Battle of Hastings. That's when it's because from the beginning, you never had a vote for whether there was government or not. It was either pay or go to jail. And people say, why do you keep harping on the violence? Would you say that to a rape victim? What is wrong with you?
Oh, no,
That's what's wrong with the situation. It's not voluntary.
Yeah. No, we've always been under a little bit of serfdom, a little bit of oppression and repression. But at the end of the day, once a man or a woman decides to start thinking maybe laterally and not just taking what they're being bottom fed straight up, and then they start using their brains and looking at things in different ways, that's when they kind of start switching on and saying, yeah, no, life's not meant to be like this. Growing up as a kid, I can remember a lot more freedoms than we've got today. I mean, we used to go up to London and swim in the Serpentine, just strip down to our pants, and in we go. And but now you have to pay to swim in the Serpentine, and I just think to myself, whatever happened to simple pleasures and just freedom and just being able to go and do what you felt was right? Everything's got a price tag. The song Jessie J for me just tells it all. Everything's a price tag, and there's far more to this life than just being able to pay for something. I can't stand it in this country. It's oppressive. But we're seeing change. Stab, have you got any questions for Mark you want to get out there?
I thought you'd never asked that. No, you guys have covered pretty much all the bases, really. I mean, I agree with Mark. I mean, I've looked at constitutions, Dave. I've looked at Magna Carta. I've looked at the Declaration of Rights. I've even gone back to 1066, like Mark says, and the feudal system. And you want to talk about commercial law? Well, you go and look at the Sheetal and who brought it in with William the Conqueror, and the people who he brought in to bring it in. That speaks volumes. If you want to look at that, go and rehearse that. I'm not going to go over it. It's up to everybody else to do their own research. But I'm very much like the lines of what Mark is saying. It's just the Cosa Nostra, mafioso, whatever you want to, whether it's the Gambinos or the Corleones, it really doesn't matter. And that's who you're voting for, basically. And very much like down the line, like Mark, it's just a bunch of greedy people that have had the monopoly for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And this whole game hasn't changed for thousands of years. But with guys like yourself, Dave, and guys like Mark, and quite a lot of, even down to the individual who's he's getting banned every other week on Faceache or whatever, he's putting a post up, even a guy who just puts the odd thing up on Facebook, it all adds to the mix. And you know what, I'm not really that I hear Mark's side of it, and I know Mark gets into, not altercations, but not even arguments, it's just basically that have somebody who will come from the freedom on the land, or try and talk to Mark about legislation and how you're meant to go about it and all this business. The private and the public, Dave, you've been there, you know the score. And really, I don't care, really. Everybody puts in who wants some type of freedom to get out of the system that we've suffered for hundreds and thousands of years of the Gambinos or the Corleones, with a gun to your head, whatever it takes, let's all put in together. there's no need for this. You're not doing it right. You're a shill. You're working for the government. I know. I mean, there's a lot of division out there. But no, I think you guys have covered it. There was one little thing I would say to Mark. Actually, I did mention it on a Skype chat the other day. That it's so dangerous now. We're at such a point where they're so arrogant and they're blatant about their administrative tribunals, Dave, as you said, because that's what they are now. Anything to do with they're all administrative tribunals. Now, if I can just very quickly share a screen.
Hello. Yeah, sorry. Come in.
I'll just put this on here.
I'm talking to Mark Stevens. You don't want to talk to a Rottweiler.
Yeah, if I just share this here, Mark, I'm not sure. Can you see my screen, Mark?
Yes, I can.
Well, this here, law society that teaches law students, and these guys are legally trained, and you know the score all about that. I mean, I'm not au fait in the legal land, but I'll be honest with you. But we'll quit all the rubbish down here. But I'll go to one little line here. It says here, and I quote, "In general, tribunals are not bound by the rules of evidence observed in courts." Now, I don't need to go on and read any more of that. Basically, it just tells me what I've already known. They're being so blatant now that we're in a situation where people and generations will grow up with this being the norm, and this will be the law, and it is the law to a lot of people who are not awake. But they're so blatant. They're saying we're not bound by the rules of evidence. We don't have to give you evidence, basically. So,
we spoke about this, yes, and I just want to point out that just because the rules of evidence, the formal rules of evidence don't apply, doesn't mean that they're not bound by evidence, and it doesn't mean that technically that the principles of due process don't still apply. So we got to be careful and not, generalize. And I'm not saying in practical terms, the rules don't apply, because we know in every court, even when it says the rules apply, if it gets in the way of a conviction, they throw the rule out. Right. So it is the same thing as like we have in a lot of traffic courts here, and it's been like that for decades.
Yeah. Well, this is where the confusion. I'm not legally trained. I wouldn't know where to start in it. You're way up past than I could ever be at my old age and never will be. So when I read these things, I go, it doesn't apply at all to me, because that's still a gun at the head, because that actually confirms a gun at the head. That means there's no jury, there's nothing. We are prosecution, jury, convicted, whatever the legal terms are.
Judge, jury, and executioner, I think the words you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. So there they have it written there. Now, I don't. To me, I'm not obliged to any of that crap. I really am not, and it'll stay that way until I leave this mortal coil, because that's the way I am now. And it's as far as I'm concerned, yeah, it's the George Carlin, isn't it? It's a club and you ain't in it. It really is. And the other thing is, and it is, as they say, I think I put it up on one of Dave's posts the other day. It is a Latin phrase, and it's called argumentum ad baculum, which is a rule by the stick.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the appeal to the stick. So that's actually what that Harvard law grad Scott Bales. It's on my website, markstevens.net. You can see he's the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, and that's what he said. He said that the evidence. When I asked him for evidence that their laws applied, because I was physically in Arizona, he said because people are prosecuted and put in prison every day in Arizona. And I even said, wait a minute, that's an argumentum ad baculum. You're just appealing to the stick. And he thought it was still appropriate. Now, there are non-fallacious appeal to the stick and consequences, sure, but that wasn't one of them. And that's what it comes down to. You do as I say, or I will have someone hurt you.
Yep, and that is exactly where we are, and we've probably been for hundreds, if not millennium. But I think it's all good, Mark, and what you do is fantastic. And I love your call to shame. I'm always checking the call to shame, and it's just they're just stumped, aren't they? Let's be honest. you know, the circular argument is you know, bang on, and keep up the good work, Mark, as I say.
Well, thanks. There was the supervisor I mentioned in Canada earlier. His name is Ron, and it's the Canadian Revenue Agency. And this is a direct quote when I ask for evidence proving their laws apply. I don't need evidence. And that's what it comes. So just this is one of the things I wanted to, and I have to do a follow with the law professor Robert Diab. He admitted that, and he is a PhD in law, by the way. He's a pretty educated guy. He knows what he's talking about. And he said that there is no evidence proving the laws apply. It was a blunt assertion of power. And what I wanted to be able to get to, and wasn't able to, was if it is just a blunt assertion of power by men and women, then wouldn't we be morally justified in using self-defensive force to put down that blunt assertion of power? And that's... Imagine something like that in the mainstream where you've got these politicians backed up and they would have to say, you know, at least theoretically, you're absolutely right. If somebody makes a blunt assertion of power, you can use self-defense to stop that assertion of power. I'm like, oh, now all of a sudden people are going to start to understand why there are no good politicians, why there are no good cops. You have less violent cops. And then, Dave, you would mention, you know, some blokes that they're less violent.
Yes.
Yes, but even a less violent member of the mafia is still a member of the mafia.
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. Exactly right. Yeah, and they are a mafia. They're the only public sector workers that are completely off the radar. They will harm you, and they won't even show 1 ounce of emotion in their eyes. I chatted with a Jamaican guy about 3 months ago that got arrested early morning. He was cuffed, he was stripped naked on the roadside, and I'm going to put this out there because I think it's not funny, but it might get people's ears to prick up. His testicles were on the curb. They took him to a holding centre and they kept him there for 4 days because he's watched a few of my videos and he wouldn't give them any information about himself. This guy had been in England since 2006. He'd been married twice and had children. And in the end, they moved him to a detention centre near an airport, near Heathrow. 4 days in, he phoned me up and he said, you know, what to do? I said, well, what you've told me thus far, carry on doing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't tell them nothing. Don't sign nothing. Don't accept nothing. And 2 days later, they released him. Whilst he was in custody, they beat him several times. He cut mouth, some quite horrific injuries. And I just have to say to myself, who are these people that are administrating this kind of justice, this ethical rule of? They're supposed to set an example. They're not there to beat us. Many years ago, when a constable arrested you, you felt pretty safe because he swore to protect the property, life and liberty of men and women and subjects. But it's certainly not happening nowadays. But that's just one instance. That guy is one instance. I must have 3,000 messages on my Facebook with similar haunting accounts from people that suffered child abuse in Jersey at Hope de la Grange, where all the kids were being ritualistically abused by high-profile people. Some of these stories have set me to tears, and I carry them with me all the time. Someone's got to hear them. I've heard some horrific things from a lot of good people that have managed to get over the trauma and try to come back and live a life. But this is what we're up against. We are up against this tyranny, and people, they won't see it until they're in the middle of it. And it's only when they turn around and say to these people, actually, I don't agree with what you're trying to do. And then before you know it, like a whirlwind, a hurricane, like a Champion the Wonder Horse, they're on you like a pack of dogs, and there is nowhere else to go, because once you're in that custody suite and them cells, there is no one that's going to come and rescue you until they say you can leave. That's sad, man. That's savage.
Well, you know, Dave, you hit the nail on the head there. You mentioned early in that statement that there's not a hint of sympathy or empathy.
No.
They
No.
don't care. And I wrote this in Government Indicted recently. What's really unfortunate, guys, is that the average person is so willfully blind to the true nature of these individual men and women that it's usually not going to be until they're personally attacked and they find out for themselves. And it's not anything you wish on anybody. I mean, it's like I said to someone at the CRA yesterday, the Canadian Revenue Agency. I said, I hope that you, sir, are never a victim of your own company, that they don't do to you what they're doing to my friend.
Amen.
And it's just in one ear and out the other. There's the level of depravity really has to be experienced to believe it. I've been there. I've been threatened by Mesa police that they were going to kill me. I've had my life threatened in the police department, shackled to a bench for nonviolent traffic. Right. So I get it, and it's really it really is sad. Like we've spoken a number of times about how people are just plugged into the TV and when they just don't give a damn. If the average person actually knew and understood the depravity of these people and the lack of empathy, that's why we call them sociopaths or psychopaths, and there probably would be a revolution tomorrow.
There would, and that's why the police generally and the court system are very scared and very worried about cameras. Now, given the fact that these people have weapons of war, they have handguns, sidearms, MP5s, MP3s, tasers, mace spray, all sorts of weaponry, but the camera seems to bother them quite significantly, and they say, delete the evidence, they seize your phone, because they don't want the general public knowing what they're up to. Sad, man. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we go through that problem. I don't know how. I have to plead ignorance that I don't live there, and it just seems to be that the American news, because even the Guardian is reports big time on all the police shootings out here. It seems like almost every day it's being reported that another person is killed. I read this morning that somebody was killed just a couple days ago right here in Mesa. A guy was unarmed. It happened right. And I didn't hear about it until this morning, and it happened a few days ago. Even when they say that the cameras malfunction, nothing happens. Are you going to tell me on 7/7 when that false flag there in London 10 years ago, that every CCTV footage, every single one, malfunctioned at the same time?
Yeah, no, I agree. I looked at the Paris thing the other week that happened on Friday the 13th, which has always been a superstitious day in England, and that comes down to the 1357 or 1307 when the Pope issued the execution of all the Knights Templars. And like you just said, why? Where's the cameras? Where's the street cameras? Because there's cameras on every corner. England is the most lockdown country. There's cameras everywhere. So Paris, I would presume, would be the same. So where's the evidence? And I'm not being funny, but if I was a terrorist, I certainly wouldn't be taking a passport with me. That's for sure.
Oh, and you look at the 9/11, where you probably had anywhere from 10 to 15 private security cameras, getting footage of the Pentagon, and they don't release it. All they release is like 4 or 5 frames. So the thing with the cameras, even with the cameras, we've had people killed on camera. The evidence is clear. It's no more of this, you had to be there, Mark. You don't know. Oh, I am there with the camera. It's in HD video. I am there. And they still don't put these, hold these cops accountable. It's absolutely disgraceful. And it's a symptom, and I have to leave here in a few minutes, it's a symptom of the problem, or it's a cause it's an effect of the main cause, which we've said a number of times so far. It is because they are men and women forcing us to pay them, and you cannot expect anything but violence and lies and death from them. We cannot be surprised. So even if we had cameras on the cops 24 hours a day, every single moment, they still wouldn't be held accountable because it's the scumbag prosecutors who go before the grand jury and convince the grand jury not to convict. Because there's a saying here in the U.S. that the grand jury would indict a ham sandwich unless it's a cop. If that ham sandwich is a cop, then it can't convict. So they don't go in trying to get an indictment. They go in to convince, and they've shown that. So the whole system is rotten from top to bottom. It's neo-feudalism, and as long as we accept that double standard, it's going to continue.
Amen.
Dropping that double standard, not complying with them, is how we get towards a free, voluntary society, and until that time, it's just going to keep continuing. We cannot rationally complain about something, and just the effect, and not address the cause. And we know what the cause is. They've known this for a millennium. My gosh, Etienne de la Boetie wrote about it 500 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't ask that you put your hands on the tyrant, just that you support him no more. And like the great Colossus will collapse under his own weight, because Cameron only has two eyes. He only has two hands. He's human. How does he accomplish what he's doing? He has an army at his disposal who believes this stuff.
That's right. Yeah. We're seeing a shift. I mean, there was a big protest the other day up on London Bridge near Parliament, and all the students had shut down the road, and everything had come to a standstill. So we're seeing amplifications of certain things happening in Ireland. There's so much going on in Ireland at the moment because the Irish, bless them, have been under the euro for such a long time. Then people have been stripped from the weekend and back, and they're quite a few years more advanced than we are, and they are turning out in their absolute thousands now on weekend rallies with flags flying. So, you know, Mark, at the end of the day, there's always hope, and all the time there is hope, then we got a positive future maybe in the midst. And I do believe that that's going to be the case in the future.
Yeah, I believe that, especially because of technology, we can do things like this. My radio show, I can reach people in New Zealand and instantaneous, and there are more people, and people are getting it, and it's just a matter of education and letting people know that they're not the only ones out there. I mean, when I realized that there were no citizens and governments and states and whatnot, I felt like I was all alone, and I didn't realize that there was, because of the internet, I was able to find people who saw through the nonsense like I had, and that really helps. It's letting people know that there are a lot of us out there, and the numbers are swelling, and it's yes.
I apologize for arriving late. I guess I've missed most of it.
Yeah, I think I put in the Skype that I'm going to need to run. I've got somebody. I've got to help a friend with the CRA. So that's with the supervisor who told me I don't need evidence.
Well, I had to ask a member at Public just randomly to volunteer to help me sign on for my claim today. So without that generous, kind person who volunteered to help me out, I'd still be stuck today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've had a bit of grief lately from a few departments within government, but we could touch on that another time.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again, and we can on Skype. You can let me know what's going on, and I'll see if there's something I can do to help. But I appreciate the opportunity. I hope we can do this again, guys. I do have to run.
Okay, Mark.
Pleasure, man.
Great stuff. Better late than never, PJ. We'll catch up with you in a minute on Skype. Yeah. Okay, Mark, we got there eventually. Took a bit of pitching up, but thanks very much for your time. Great work you're doing, and really appreciate you coming on Axiom Curb today. And we'll be in touch, yeah? Cheers, mate.
Yes, I appreciate it, guys. And send me the link when you guys get it posted.
Okay, we'll do. No
Take
problem.
care, Mark. God bless you.
Thanks. Cheers, mate.
Yes. Cheers, Dave. Thanks for coming on.